How's it going, everyone? Today I'm going to do something a bit different. With the recent release of the Netflix original live-action Alice in Borderlands, I wanted to see how it compared to the manga and anime adaptation. Unlike my other videos, I'll actually be talking about numerous spoilers, so if you want to avoid them, skip to 1546, and from there I'll summarize the differences between them all and give a few of my overall opinions. Starting off, it's incredibly easy to see one huge difference in the live-action compared to the anime and manga. This is the initial transition to the Borderlands and the first game they're faced with. The manga as well as anime show them at a train station watching fireworks go off overhead as they're transported to the Borderlands. Here, they're faced with a Tokyo that's in decay. It has rampant plant growth and the city is seemingly abandoned to the elements. They eventually find their way to some festival grounds where they face their first game. They also encounter their first participant outside of their group, this being Shibuki, but I have a lot to discuss about her in a little bit. Back to their first game. They're required to draw fortunes that ask them to answer a mathematical riddle, and incorrect answers are punished by a hail of arrows rained down from above. Their salvation are the clues indicating directions of where these arrows are shot from, hidden within the fortune. These scenes are basically the same in the anime and manga, with very few differences, but when we take a look at the live action, the entire game is different. They're trapped in a building where they need to navigate between one of two doors over and over, with the wrong choice ending in the death of whoever chose the door. They also add a character to demonstrate this death mechanic who isn't present in the source material. My biggest problem personally with this change is how Arisu approaches the problem. He pulls out the 300 IQ obscure details where he just knows the length of a BMW 523D. It's overly anime and honestly kind of painful to watch. It's compounded by the fact that each door selection is done absolutely last second, emphasizing the dramatization factor of live action. This extends to how Chota injures his leg, which obviously differs from the manga due to the nature of the game. So I explained a lot more about the plot than I will when I talk about future games, as well as story development in general, as this is one of the points that departs so heavily from the manga and anime. Before I talk about the overall plot though, I thought now might be the best time to just go through all the characters and their similarities and differences before I move on to the specific decisions they make. I might as well start with Arisu, our main character. In the manga, Arisu is self-conscious as he basically lives in his brother's shadow. He struggles to leap into action, but manages to find the courage to do so on many occasions as he builds it into a habit. He's portrayed as heavily empathetic and cries on many occasions due to the despair of the situations he's in, as well as the actions of other participants and overall how people just treat each other in these games. He's incredibly observant and is shown to actively study his environments. In the live action though, he's basically just a gamer NEET who's significantly more hesitant to play the role he was created to play. He's still in his brother's shadow, but the way he's constantly shown crying portrays these tears more as an inherent weakness in him and an inability to face the situations he's in. It may not be entirely accurate, but it feels like it leans more to this than to his empathetic side, which is so heavily shown in the manga, and his strong observational skills are downplayed and presented in eureka moments instead of an active thought process. Next, and one of the best character adaptations in my opinion, is Karube. His appearance, reliance of physical ability, and overall ability to lead the group are similar between all the media forms. In the manga he's more mature and overall faster to act, basically more decisive and reliable, but I believe was reproduced quite faithfully. Chota, on the other hand, is completely different. In the manga and anime he's basically whimsical, dumb, energetic, and honestly drags down the group, but is nonetheless part of the team. The live action portrays him as a hardworking businessman who discovers the role that analog machines play in the Borderlands, with a backstory heavily centered around his mother, which is non-existent in the manga. Even the appearance of his character is vastly different. The only real similarity is his name and the fact he's here. Overall, I found it detrimental to the story to completely change him, but that may partially be due to how arbitrary I felt the decision to actually do so felt. Following this is the intermediate Shibuki. Her overall character and even appearance is fairly similar, but her backstory with her boss is a new addition to the live action, as well as giving her a more conniving nature. Also, in the manga compared to the live action, she's significantly more knowledgeable about the Borderlands as a whole, and from her backstory the main theme around her character is guilt, which feels more warranted in the manga compared to the anime. A large difference is Usagi, where the live action foreshadows her appearance at the end of episode 1, where she isn't actually referenced until they meet her in the second game, in the manga and anime. As a whole, her appearance and experience is fairly well adapted. There's a lot of her backstory omitted and her abilities are downplayed, but I'd roughly say she's the character I was expecting going into the adaptation. There's much less to discuss about many members of the Beachz, so I can quickly summarize the differences between many of these characters. However, the first two do deserve a bit more detail. It should also be noted that by the time they reach the beach, the anime is concluded. All these differences exist exclusively between the manga and live action. Agni in the manga is just absolutely massive and built of muscle. He looks completely fearless and just overwhelmingly powerful. This is one of the most excusable differences, as it would be incredibly difficult to find a Japanese actor the size of The Rock to act out Agni. However, in the live action they introduce him in the second game, where they don't actually meet him until the beach in the manga, which I don't fully understand why they made this change. Moving on is Hatter, who I understand is probably the hardest character to act in the show, but unfortunately was not done justice and was changed overall in the live action. It looked like the directing as well as the actual acting faltered when it came to Hatter. He is without a doubt the most over-the-top character, so full of emotion while exuding an aura of derangement and the ability to impose over others through his charisma. His hair and attire also stand so far apart from the other characters and traditional Japanese society, but it feels like his character was reined in all aspects and the acting for it would have been suitable for any other character aside from the enigma that is Hatter. One character that's definitely done well though is Kuina. His appearance definitely reflects the source material closely and the acting is quite faithful as well. The biggest shortcoming is Kuina's actual size, which again is hard to cast for as they'd require a very large Japanese woman who met the rest of the criteria, though once again, I'd consider this very forgivable. The next character I want to talk about is Chisaya, who from appearance to acting, I feel like is the best done character. Some of his individual scenes differ, but that doesn't bring down how well he carried out. You may hate Chisaya, but I have nothing but praise for the live action portrayal of him. Moving on, I'm going to quickly hit a few points about a couple other main characters. An's appearance and demeanor in the live action is much more businesslike, which creates a surprising difference to me between the two versions. She's also impassive and in control, while her manga version seems more human, and she betrays an air of nervousness on many occasions. Mira's appearance I felt was incredibly well done, but her smug and perhaps almost domineering attitude is less present in the live action, which is a pretty obscure detail for me to even mention, but it stood out to me. Naragi overall was incredibly well done as well. He was a little bit less insane in the live action, as he was constantly wagging his tongue at the manga, so a change I didn't personally mind at all. Samura though felt like he should be very similar, but just wasn't. He was less creepy and less sure of himself. The live action version, he was basically just a guy with tattoos and a sword. He didn't have the conviction and isolation ground into his personality that shone through in the manga. Finally, we can get back to the plot where most of the things I mentioned won't be about massive details. To transition back to our original group of 4, they displayed actual teamwork in the first game, as well as throughout their days in the Borderlands that definitely isn't highlighted in the live action. In the manga, compared to the other two, they also describe a lot more of the backstory for Shibuki and Arisu. Shibuki's first game is fully explained in the manga and emphasizes her guilt as well as the psychological aspect of a game of hearts. Arisu himself reflects a lot more on his past life, as it shows his family relationship much more clearly, and even his school life, including one particularly important scene about his experience with guitar. Most likely due to this, he seems a lot more at home in the Borderlands, as he's constantly relaxing in the manga, but is a lot more on edge in the live action. But the games are what a lot of people found the most interesting, so I'll move on to the second game. The description of the game differs, as the anime and manga mention the actual danger of the game in the introduction to it. Arisu is also a lot more confident going into it, and even their reasoning in the manga to join, which is because their life is on the line, is different from the live action decision of they need to find other participants, who may be a doctor, for Shota. This was honestly a bit strange, as the manga portrayed the bond of the group as a lot closer than either the anime or live action. Although it isn't found out till later in the game, the live action adds a second hunter in the tag game that isn't present originally. A small thing that doesn't actually really affect anything is that the live action Arisu yells out the chaser's location, while in the manga it is Karube. But what does matter is in the anime, the pursuer definitely seems the most aggressive. Where the biggest difference comes in is the ambush scene. In the live action, it includes Agni and quite a battle between everyone, while in the manga it is quite short as he kills the two who ambush him with his SMG almost immediately. And the manga has Karube make an incredibly over-the-top escape, literally as he vaults over the top edge of the stairwell. This also eventually extends into the second skirmish with Karube and the pursuer, where Karube in the live action sustains a machete wound, where he breaks his ribs from the escape in the anime. Throughout this game, the scenes of Usagi are almost exclusively showing off her athleticism through climbing, which is definitely played down in the live action for obvious reasons. But it leads us to her grand entrance near the end of the second game to assist Arisu, being slightly different as she either climbs in through a window, kicks the pursuer, or just swings in to hit the button, depending on the version. With the game completed, Arisu is shown to be quite remorseful in the live action, but incredibly excited in the anime. There's a couple scenes that I'll mention that occur as flashbacks or simply aren't present from the third game that I'll discuss here so it flows a bit better later on. Shibuki and Shota sleep together in all versions, but the live action is the only one where there was an underlying idea of manipulation from Shibuki, and not just a bond of a mutual feeling of helplessness and unworthiness between the two. There's even another scene of Shibuki bathing in the river in the manga that isn't present elsewhere, which is another exclusion I can see why they decided to make. They actually are shown to play around a lot more in the manga as well, like going to the bowling alley is one example. Also specifically in regards to Karube. In the manga he was shown to be the bar owner, where I don't believe it's actually mentioned in the live action, and the live action instead added a certain romance. They even show how Arisu met Karube as he saved him from thugs in his school days in the manga, which I felt like was a key scene they definitely should have added. Also, like my description of many of these events, a lot of how the story is presented comes in different orders throughout the anime, manga, and live action. Many flashbacks or even events are excluded in live action or anime, and many others are inserted at various different times. One that stands out is in the manga they flash back to part of the intro of them drinking at the bar, which is different in the timing and content compared to the live action and manga bar scenes. Moving on to one of my personal biggest grudges about the live action, and even a bit about the manga, is the explanation of these games. Through various characters the games are explained in each, but the manga does it by far the most clearly and accurately describes the heart suit as psychological games, and not games of betrayal, which the live action added, which just felt so wrong. Moving on from my feelings to those of the characters in our Game of Hearts. The first thing is the appearance of the game. The headset and board in the live action felt much more futuristic and appropriate than the anime and manga retro versions, which is one of the few times I prefer the live action change. However, the game itself, Karube, starts off a lot wilder and persistent in his hunt in the manga. Arisu demonstrates a stronger will when he decides to hide, not shedding tears and strengthening his resolve, while manga Shibuki not only feels remorse, but nearly immediately when she faces her decision. A small detail previously mentioned comes into play when Shibuki hits Karube to escape and makes the most sense in the manga due to broken ribs instead of a gunshot or machete wound in the other version. Finally, we get to one of the most powerful scenes in the entire series, the conclusion to the third game. To me, it felt most powerful in the manga presentation, but any form it could bring a tear to your eye. This may simply be preference, but regardless, is incredibly sad and surprising. Even at the conclusion, Arisu in the manga is shown to burn down the entire site due to his grief and frustration over the situation, where it's more accidental in the other versions. This brings us to an important point, the end of chapter 14 and the end of the anime. From here on, all the differences will be much easier to reference as they exist solely between the manga and live action. To start this section, there's a vast difference between how Arisu accepts help from Usagi. He not only asks for it directly, but straight up requests assistance and curses the creators of the game in the manga, while in the live action he apathetically is dragged to Usagi's hideout, which in the live action is a hangar and in the manga is simply a tent in the park. In the manga, Usagi has significantly more backstory as it relates to her experiences in elementary and high school to explain how she currently is. Even her dad's suicide is graphically shown in the manga, where it's noted, but doesn't really make nearly the same impression in the live action. As they search for the beach in the manga, it takes days and days of research, where they eventually walk right up and even into the beach. The live action, they briefly research it, where they chase cars to discover it, are assaulted, and brought before the leader of the beach, being Hatter. One game which is incredibly different is the light bulb game with An. In the live action, it's a test for Arisu, while he's not even present in the game in the manga, where it's immediately solved by An. Hatter's murder is built up different, occurs in different locations, and even upon discovery is presented vastly different. For example, the manga has him riddled with bullets, where it's much more obvious that it's a murder. Another scene comes up when Naragi's sexually assaulting Usagi, which was already done quite creepily in the live action, even more sexual in the manga, which once again is an understandable decision to clean it up a bit for the real actors. While they're searching for Arisu as he's hidden in the room, the man who gives the location is beaten by Usagi and interrogated in the manga, while the live actually simply shows him overwhelmed by the murder and cowering in an empty room. But one of the most important differences comes up here. Arisu in the manga, while deprived of his senses, is constantly thinking of his friends and how he feels he betrayed them. A powerful scene that is simply absent in the live action. There's also two side stories in chapter 22 and 29 in the manga, which aren't in the live action, which I suppose is fine, as they're more constrained by time in the live action, but would have been nice to see. As I continue to just jump from scene to scene, I felt the showdown between Kuina and Samura better acknowledge their similarities and strengthens their characters, which felt like a missed opportunity on the part of the crew in charge of directing. Another scene that stood out to me was as Agni walks into the main hall dragging an unconscious Kuina in the manga, which they didn't add to the live action. And I come back to another instance of the heavy dramatization of live action, as Agni tackles Naragi into the fire after he just massacred the hall with his guns. Neither of which occur in the manga, but it does show Naragi alive afterwards in the manga, which is hard to add in the live action due to the just mentioned scene with Agni and Naragi. One of the huge details and final things to mention is that the dealers didn't record their journey on a cell phone. Their experience is mostly just Arisu's intuition that is built upon in later discussions with other participants. Many things after this point are confusing to compare and don't feel right to call differences, as almost all of the events up to the announcement of the next phase of the game aren't present in the live action, but may be added in the next season. I'd also like to note that Season 1 of the live action ends roughly around Chapter 31, with some of the events at the end of the season being sprinkled in around there. Alright, so to start off my conclusions, I want to begin with an apology. The way I went through this video definitely felt a little messy due to the nature of it. I wanted to be able to provide some context for all these decisions, while emphasizing some of the more important ones and simply mentioning a lot of the smaller ones. It was hard to do this without just bullet point naming them all off, and I ended up deciding to skip over a few of the smallest changes. Skipping some as well as dialing back on the discussion of others are what helped me keep this video from going over an hour, as it's already significantly longer than my others. But if anyone's interested in that, just let me know when the Season 2 live action is released. I can go much more in depth. Overall, there are a lot more flashbacks that develop characters throughout the entirety of the manga that just aren't present in the live action or anime. I felt like this was part of what helped build Alice in Borderlands' great story, and have so much key information missing was definitely a disappointment. I understand that there's a finite amount of time available to develop all this material, with this being a much bigger concern for the 3-episode anime, making it all a little bit more forgivable. It is still a bit sad about how they decided which material to keep, as there's a lot that could have been cut for more important moments. They did, however, keep the overarching plot and a huge amount of content the same, which as a whole allowed it to be an entertaining experience. There's a huge amount of changes, but even more stayed the same. With a story like Alice in Borderlands, it's hard for any sort of remake to outshine the original. The manga is in my eyes still the best developed and most complete experience, with the anime being a short but sweet faithful adaptation, and even though the live action takes many liberties, it's still a decent live action, and without any prior knowledge of the story, would probably be quite entertaining. The one piece of advice I would give the crew for Season 2 is, less is more. Dial back on the Hollywood style action, the amount of changes, and filler dialogue as well as scenes, and it would most likely be an even better received than the first season. But they'll probably never see this, so hopefully they can discover it for themselves. And in the meantime, I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope to see you again. And until next time, I'm going Ghost.